us for our, what we call our LP Summit briefs. Zach Shulman's been an invaluable board member for Launch New York, actually from the beginning. So, you know, Zach, as many of you know, is Managing Director of the Hugo Venture Fund, but just as important is he is engaged with very early stage seed and early stage companies through his work through Cornell. So we're absolutely thrilled that you can join us today, and we're excited for your remarks and reflections on investment trends regionally and beyond, Zach. So I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks everybody. So I'm going to take advantage of being asked to talk about investment trends and kind of twist it a little bit. And I'm actually going to talk more about what VCs want as a trend in people. Particularly now in the current environment. I kind of think personally that trends are a little boring. So, you know, I could always say, oh yeah, companies that are improving food growth or addressing food issues, or companies that are addressing energy are popular. And I mean, that's kind of true, and we all read about those things. But what I really want to focus on is what I think investors want from any company in any segment. If that's okay with you, Marnie. So I kind of twisted it a little bit. So I'm just going to go down a couple of bullets, and you know, I don't mind being interrupted during this. I know we have to keep it to about 10 minutes, and I only have probably 5 minutes of things to say at most. So feel free to turn yourself off mute and just interrupt or raise your hand on Zoom, and I'll do my best to call on you or put a question in the chat. So the first one is that investors want trustworthy founders. And trustworthiness is a very subjective thing. And I always tell people this, it's hard to measure. It's something you actually feel a lot, and it's absolutely critical. And the way that you engender trustworthiness, and remember, you know, these relationships are really, really long. So I can pick on Hakeem because I've talked to him a bunch of times, and he's a Cornell guy. I mean, if Hakeem's going to get investment from a VC or even an angel investor, it's a long-term investment, and it's not something where he can easily jettison the investor, and it's not something where the investor can easily jettison him. So this trustworthiness around the working relationship is absolutely key, and I can't emphasize it enough. It's my number one factor that I look at actually when doing diligence on a person. So how do you gain trust, right? How can I, for example, how can Hakeem gain my trust? And by the way, we're not looking at Hakeem's company yet for investment, so it's okay if I keep picking on him. First of all, complete transparency. So we want people that are happy to share all they can about their company, even about themselves if it's appropriate, in a way that makes us feel as investors that we're getting the full picture. Okay, I call the opposite the shroud of opaqueness. Okay, and if there is a shroud of opaqueness, your investors will notice it quickly, and it will put up a huge red flag. So being open, being responsive, which is my next point with wonderful communication, right? So we need people and want people that can communicate concisely, frequently, with probing questions back to us. We don't mind when people ask us questions. We really enjoy that actually. So, you know, we want people to feel that we're adding some value back. But during this diligence process, when we're checking each other out, you know, don't be afraid to ask questions both ways, right? And really, really try to be as responsive as possible. It's absolutely, absolutely key. So again, concise. I'm thinking about Jordy, for example, reading an email from somebody, you know, and if it's this long, he might read it, but if it's this long, the chances of him reading it go down. Okay, so you really just want to really get to the point and directly answer questions. The next one, the next factor that we always look for are companies that can get big without being tied to a small number of potential acquirers. In fact, I really can't stand it, just to be direct and concise with my communication. I really can't stand it when I see an investment deck and somebody says, oh, we'll be sold to X, Y, or Z company. Okay, well, that tells me that you're really limited in your mind to X, Y, or Z. And by the way, the chances of that happening are really, really small. I'd rather just see an investment deck that shows that you can get really big. Okay, because companies that can get big in an efficient way, really the exit takes care of itself most of the time, which is important. And I don't want people thinking, you know, on day one that they have to be glued to a potential exit strategy. I do want them to feel that they need to be glued to getting big. Okay, and that's actually really, really important. So companies that can get big without being tied to a small number of acquirers, that's what we want. Next factor, are there any questions so far, by the way? I can see all you, I think. I'm just going to assume not unless someone starts talking. Okay, the next factor. Oh.
Can I just ask you a question here?
Yeah.
One of the things I think the companies struggle with when they're really young is, you know, how if they tell a completely accurate story with all the details, they worry that they will chase you away. So yes, you know, most of them understand that they need to be trustworthy, but I think they struggle with balancing some amount of being optimistic and a salesperson with being truthful and transparent.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't think it's much of a problem if people acknowledge that their projections are made up just based on good information, but they are guesses. I mean, it's really, really hard when, you know, you see projections of a company going from 0 revenue to $1 million to $3 million. Like, that's not that exciting for a VC, right? Unless maybe year 4 is up to 20, right? So, I mean, we need a pretty big ramp at the end. So, I mean, I think that what's really, really key is that the projection model and the company's pitch, like, go hand in hand, like hand in glove, like they have to fit together. In fact, the model itself, you know, should really tell a story, and that story should be very, very consistent with the pitch deck. So, I mean, I don't mind hearing problems like, oh yeah, you know, our management team needs to be augmented, or we need to nail down how we're going to manufacture this product. I mean, that's fine. Those are problems that we deal with all the time. So I'd much rather know going in that the person is realistic, as opposed to them thinking otherwise. So I don't really think it's an issue, at least not for me, Marnie. It might be for others. I mean, Jordy, I know he's another investor on the phone, and so is Clayton. You guys can chime in if you want to.
Well, can I ask you a question, Zach?
Yeah.
You want to hear the normal, this is my conservative plan, or are you interested in hearing the dream?
I'm actually interested in hearing both. Like, I don't mind hearing both at all, but I definitely have to hear the dream plan. Like, the dream plan is really, really important. The way that I present the dream plan, by the way, is to say, if all the stars aligned, which never happens, but if all the stars aligned, how fast could you get to 50 million of revenue?
Zach?
Yeah, Ken.
One of the things I always tell entrepreneurs is tell the best story you can tell. The VC's job, they're going to discount it anyway. Don't go starting, oh, it's conservative. They're going to make it conservative. You tell the best, honest, great story you can tell. Let the VCs give it a haircut. Don't give it a haircut for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, 1 second, Clay. It's actually interesting because if they give the conservative plan and it shows, you know, 0, 1, 3, 5, like, that's going to do nothing. Like, we're not going to get excited. Yeah. But if the conservative plan shows, you know, 0, 1, 5, 15, that will get somebody excited, okay? Because the next year should be 40, right? Like, that's actually okay. So it really depends on how the entrepreneur is defining conservative. And I would definitely take good mentorship on that, because you're right. You don't want to come in with a kind of boring plan. It's just not, it's not going to do anybody any good. Clayton?
I think I'm agreeing. The way I look at it is to make sure, I want to hear the good story, but I also want to know that they've thought about the downside, that
Yeah, right.
they understand the market they're looking at may be different, or this is the thing we have to do, the hurdle we have to get over. So as long as they thought about the possible downside, then, and of course, if you're a glass half full, you want to hear all the good news, but you have to believe that they've thought about it and are aware of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The next quick factor is companies that can scale fast, and by fast, that projection model that I keep referring to, how fast can you get to 50 million? That's actually pretty important. The exception there are biotech and healthcare, some healthcare sectors. I would not include digital health in that, but other healthcare sectors, obviously therapeutics, these things take a long time to scale. But for a normal company, if you're in our portfolio after 7 or 8 years and you're not producing substantial revenue, it's a problem. And there are lots of companies that happens. So we have a few in our portfolio that have been there for a long time. It's like one of my least favorite things to say. I've been on a board for 15 years. That's too long, right? And I love the people I'm working with, but that's just not the game that we're in. And if a small fund like ours is in a company for 15 years, we are really not going to get much back because we've been diluted down so much. So scaling quickly is important. Scaling efficiently, capital efficiency is always a huge plus. So that's why software is so attractive to VCs, because it only takes, the real dollars are to pay people as opposed to hardware, where you have other manufacturing costs and factories and production lines. But by all means, our fund has invested a lot in hardware companies, and we made out quite well with a bunch of those investments. Okay, we have one now, Rionics, which hopefully will be a great win for us. And this gets to my last point, where you need companies that can take advantage of current circumstances. So our unfortunate current circumstance is COVID, and Rionics had no conception or thought of addressing COVID testing before 3 months ago. And now it's selling, it's completely sold out. So, it can't keep up with demand because they have an approved COVID test, and it's incredibly efficient, inexpensive, and it works really well. So, it's one of these things where it's important. And I heard a funny anecdote the other day. Not everyone on the management team at Rionics was into the idea of going after COVID testing. Okay, and the team coalesced and agreed to do it with the board, and it turned out to be a huge win, right? And it should be a huge win. I mean, let's knock on wood all over the place, but it should be very successful eventually. We have another company that is in what I'll call the personal communication space for safety. Okay, a safety device that you can push if you're in trouble, and it has a bunch of verticals that it can address. Well, they've pivoted and are now adding on a tracer product, not for governments necessarily, but for businesses, so they can have contact tracing of their employee basis. Okay, because it's important, right? And COVID, COVID is just the first of these viruses that we're going to have to, well, it's not the first. It's just one of many viruses that we have to keep track of. So those are my quick comments, Marty. I know I probably went over 10 minutes, but any final questions from anybody before we turn? Is Jordy up next?
Next.
All right.
Nick, thank you so much. Great to hear the real life stories that are evolving right in front of us. I think we're all finding you have to reassess. You can't take anything for granted right now. So
yeah, absolutely.
terrific. Okay.